Welcome friends to a very special Halloween episode. If you're new here, I'm Claire and this is The Wanderlust Way. Usually on this channel you will find me exploring lots of places, uncovering the history and perhaps sharing some top travel tips. But this is no ordinary video because this is no ordinary month. It's October, it's the month of Halloween, and it's a time when many people believe the veil between our world and another becomes thinner. I thought, what better way to spend Halloween 2024 than to pay a little visit to one of the most impressive, most talked about and most intriguing cemeteries that the entire world has to offer. It's therefore time to take a stroll around Highgate Cemetery in North London. This Victorian necropolis that is home to some of the most elite members of London's society, and a cemetery that is filled with stories of black magic, vampires and many gothic ghost stories. I think you'll agree it's the perfect place to bring you to this Halloween. So before we set off on a spooky wander, grab your witch's brew and perhaps a pillow to hide behind, because we'll be setting off very soon. But before we start, can I please ask you to like this video to help support the channel and to subscribe if you'd like to come along on more adventures like this. Enough waffle, let's wander. Let's begin with a bit of history, shall we? Highgate Cemetery, located in the heart of North London, was established in 1839 as part of a solution to London's growing burial crisis. The city was expanding rapidly during the Victorian era, and the small, overcrowded churchyards simply couldn't keep up. Until the 1850s, most burials took place in churchyards close to the deceased's home. But during the 19th century, mourners had more than just funeral arrangements to worry about. Body snatching became a lucrative crime in London, fueled by the demand for fresh cadavers for medical research and teaching. Churchyards in the city faced the grim reality of grave robbers attempting to steal recently buried bodies to sell to medical schools. The wealthier families, aware of this risk, often paid for additional security measures, employing night watchmen and installing secure, reinforced vaults to protect the remains of their loved ones. This was very costly. Thankfully, the Anatomy Act of 1832 effectively ended the body snatching trade, but it's safe to assume that there was still an element of fear amongst fresh burials, and those who could afford to would take every effort to deter such scandals away from their dearly departed. In the same year of 1832, an act was passed by Parliament to encourage the establishment of private cemeteries around London. This resulted in the city gaining 7 immense suburban burial grounds between 1832 and 1841, and they were to be known proudly as the Magnificent Seven. For many people, a private and independent burial ground with possibly higher security measures would mean better protection for their loved ones against the body snatchers. As so turns out, however, it wasn't just the 19th century body snatchers they needed to fear, but a group of vampire hunters in the late 60s and early 70s, but we'll get to that later. Highgate's first inhumation took place on the 26th of May 1839 and was of Elizabeth Jackson, a 36-year-old spinster of Golden Square in Soho. As the popularity of Highgate grew and space became scarce, the East Cemetery was opened in 1856, directly across Swains Lane. This expansion was necessary to accommodate the growing number of burials, and the cemetery continues to be in use today, although the number is limited. You can find Highgate Cemetery is divided into 2 parts, the West Cemetery and the East Cemetery. Now the west side is the more elaborate Victorian architecture. The east features more modern graves. I will be visiting both sides for this video, however, because of the powers of video editing, I'll be merging them together, so it just makes better for the narrative for you guys. Highgate is arguably the most famous cemetery of the Magnificent Seven, containing over 53,000 graves and having interred more than 170,000 people. It of course boasts a rich history mixed with Victorian extravagance. There are many notable people buried here, and although it may sound morbid to some, being buried at Highgate was a desirable achievement. I'm told the most visited grave is that of Karl Marx, but we'll visit some of the most famous graves a little later on in this video. Now, although Highgate is said to stretch over 37 acres, which makes it impressive alone, it's the Victorian design that makes it worth a visit. Right from the start, Highgate wasn't merely a place for burial, it was a place to be seen, even after death. The elite wanted to display their wealth and status with grand mausoleums, intricate tombstones and chapels. This was a necropolis in every sense of the word, an extravagant city for the dead, reflecting Victorian obsessions with death, mourning, and of course the afterlife. In the Victorian times, they would often treat this place as somewhere to have a very nice day out. And if you see the catacombs behind me, on top of these they would often host tea parties. Apparently it offers fabulous views over the City of London. I've mentioned before that the Magnificent Seven were private enterprises. It was in fact first established by the London Cemetery Company, but by the 1960s was declared bankrupt. During the war years, the cemetery staff was decimated, and by the end of World War II it was almost abandoned, with many spaces overgrown due to the lack of income and family members being unable to tend to graves. After this it was rescued by a charity, the Friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust, who acquired the freehold of both east and west sides by 1981. It is now a Grade 1 listed park and garden in England. Highgate Cemetery today presents a striking contrast to the manicured grounds it once was, as nature has reclaimed much of the space, leaving it beautifully overgrown. This wild, untamed environment has become a haven for a diverse range of wildlife, including vibrant jays, crows and magpies, all flitting among the gravestones and ancient trees. Squirrels scurry about, while foxes occasionally peek out from behind the foliage, creating a lively atmosphere amid the solemnity of the site. This juxtaposition of life thriving alongside the deceased lends the cemetery an enchanting mystique, embodying an ironic blend of vitality and mortality. It is a place where the living coexist with the dead, reminding us that life continues in various forms, even in a resting place. The Friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust run the site entirely for public benefit and not for profit, and they rely heavily on the income generated through visitors. Thankfully, they were also awarded a National Lottery Heritage Fund recently to undergo vital work, but the costs to maintain a cemetery of this kind are huge, and they still need to raise $1.2 million to keep it going for future generations. If you'd like to make a donation to the cemetery directly, I will drop a link in the description below. To get the very most from your visit, I would recommend booking a tour, particularly if you want to step inside the catacombs on the west side, as this is the only possible way to do that. Now, we couldn't visit Highgate Cemetery without talking about some of its most notable residents. One of the most famous graves here, and often the most visited, belongs to Karl Marx, the philosopher and revolutionary socialist. His towering tomb in the East Cemetery is enormous and a tribute to his influence on the modern world. Although born in Prussia, which is today Germany, Marx was exiled from there, and he spent his later years in London. Though controversial in life, and probably still in death, his grave continues to attract admirers and even a few detractors. But Marx isn't alone in having a famous final resting place at Highgate. It is also home to a veritable who's who of 19th and 20th century figures. You'll find the writer George Eliot, whose real name was Mary Ann Evans, buried here. She was one of the most important novelists of the Victorian era, known for works like Middlemarch and Silas Marner. Whilst mentioning writers, you can find the grave of Catherine Dickens, wife of Charles Dickens, the famous English writer. If you've been a subscriber of this channel a while, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of Dickens and was lucky enough to visit the home they shared earlier on this year. Charles isn't buried here. He's at Westminster Abbey with the rest of the children, but that's a whole other controversial story for a whole other day. Catherine rests here with their daughter Dora, who died in infancy. Dora, I'm told, was named after the character Dora Spenlow, the child bride of David Copperfield from one of Dickens's novels. Initially, Dora's coffin was placed in the catacombs, whilst Charles sought a family plot, but this took several years for legal reasons. He eventually managed to secure a plot for his beloved Dora in view of London. Catherine joined her here in 1879. The grave is now sadly very overgrown and unable to be reached from the pathway. Still in the literary world is the grave of the much-loved writer Douglas Adams, the mind behind The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Fans often leave quirky mementos like pens or little alien figurines by his headstone, a fitting tribute to the man who taught us the importance of always carrying a towel. From the art world, you also have the painter Henry Moore, who was born in York, and more recently Patrick Caulfield, a British pop artist who passed away in 2005. Caulfield designed his own grave, which features a flat slab of grey stone with the letters DEAD punched into it. Moving on, you can discover that Michael Faraday, the electrical engineer, is here, and Charles Cruft, founder of the famous dog show, who funnily enough preferred cats over dogs any day of the week. Musical fans may be interested to learn that Malcolm McLaren, who was instrumental in shaping the British punk rock scene, is also at Highgate. If you're a fan of the Sex Pistols, then chances are you know exactly who Malcolm McLaren is. Not far from Malcolm, you can also see the headstone of Jeremy Beadle, who was a regular face on British television between the 80s and 90s. His catchy show's theme tune, watch out, Beadle's about, I can still vaguely remember as I pay him a visit. But perhaps the most mentioned grave from the popular culture industry is of course George Michael, who rests on the west side next to his mother and sister. If you are a George Michael fan, you can also see a memorial bench dedicated to the singer in nearby Waterloo Park. It's a peaceful spot to sit and reflect. On the east side, sympathetic fans of the Great Train Robbery may like to visit the grave of Bruce Reynolds, known to be the mastermind behind the whole event. Football fans may also remember that Highgate was chosen as the final resting place of England footballer Ugo Ehiogu, a talented sportsman who died suddenly at the age of 44 in April 2017. He is resting on the west side of the cemetery, close to the Cuttings catacombs. Each of these graves tells a story, not just about a person, but about the society that commemorates them. It's more than a cemetery, it's like a museum of history. One of the most iconic aspects of Highgate Cemetery is its architecture. Walking through here feels almost like stepping into a Gothic novel. Victorian cemeteries were designed to be beautiful, almost garden-like, but Highgate takes this to another level. The West Cemetery in particular is home to some truly unique and dramatic features. Let's start with the Egyptian Avenue. This majestic avenue is lined with vaults inspired by ancient Egyptian architecture, reflecting the Victorian fascination with Egyptology and the belief that the ancient Egyptians knew a thing or two about eternity. Each vault was intended for a family, a sign of their wealth and status, of course. Built in the 1830s, this grand passageway is an example of the Victorian fascination with ancient Egypt, a culture they believed held the secrets of life, death and immortality. Designed by architect Stephen Geary, who is also now buried at Highgate, the Egyptian Avenue was intended to give the wealthy of Victorian London an impressive and eternal resting place, inspired by the grandeur of the Egyptian tombs. Walking through this avenue feels like stepping into another world, where the past and present meet in a silent tribute to those laid to rest here. It is lined with 8 private vaults on either side, and each vault can fit up to 12 coffins on stone shelves. The avenue, when first erected, was enclosed, but like the rest of Highgate Cemetery, decay and Mother Nature has taken over, its roof more a mixture of clambering greenery than of hard cold stone. Stepping from the Egyptian Avenue, we reach the heart of the West Cemetery and are greeted with the breathtaking Circle of Lebanon, a majestic ring of tombs which were built into the hillside and surrounding an ancient cedar tree. The iconic tree, which gave the circle its name, was already standing when the cemetery was established, a symbol of strength and endurance. It had seen countless burials and visitors throughout the centuries, making it one of the cemetery's most enduring symbols. The original tree eventually succumbed to age, but I'm told a new tree was planted in its place, ready for future generations to appreciate. There are 20 chambers here, each with a pair of iron doors. The outer vaults are classical in style, and each was designed to hold 15 coffins. This part of the cemetery, in a grand circular formation, perfectly reflects the Victorians' deep reverence for nature and their desire for impressive eternal memorials. Walking through this atmospheric circle, you can feel the weight of history and the quiet beauty that has endured for centuries. It's not just the grand architecture that captures your attention though. The decay here, crumbling stonework, ivy overtaking gravestones, it almost adds an eerie beauty. It reminds us of the fleeting nature of life, which the Victorians seemed to embrace wholeheartedly. Let's ascend up the steps now, and towards the impressive terrace catacombs. To be visited inside only by guided tour, the Gothic-style terrace catacombs sit at the highest point of the cemetery. We are asked not to take videos on the tour, and so in respect of this I only have a few photos to share with you. The catacombs extend over 73 metres and have 825 recesses, each designed to hold one coffin. Some are sealed, and as briefly mentioned before, it was here in these catacombs that vandals broke in during the early 1970s, causing an obscene amount of damage, supposedly in the name of ritual cleansing. It's not discussed at all on the tour, a part of the cemetery's past which I'm sure the friends would like to put well behind them, and rightly so. But in order to touch more on the history of the place for you, I'll delve a little more into it later when we touch on the supernatural side of Highgate.
Highgate Cemetery has not only inspired visitors and historians over the years, it's also captured the imaginations of many filmmakers and authors. Its haunting beauty and gothic atmosphere have made it the perfect backdrop for a variety of films and books.
One of the most famous films shot here is Taste the Blood of Dracula in 1970, part of the Hammer horror series. The cemetery's eerie, overgrown tombs provided the perfect setting for a chilling encounter with the legendary vampire, although some believe this may not have helped those vampire rumours. Highgate's spooky aura also appears in Dorian Gray 2009, an adaptation of Oscar Wilde's famous novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, where scenes were filmed among the gravestones, adding to the film's dark supernatural feel. We're also told on our tour that scenes from Harry Potter have been shot here, in the Circle of Lebanon. When it comes to literature, Highgate has been woven into many stories. Most notably, Audrey Niffenegger, the author of The Time Traveller's Wife, is said to have been so inspired by the cemetery that she set her novel, Her Fearful Symmetry, around it. These artistic portrayals have only added to the mystique surrounding Highgate Cemetery, making it not just a place of history, but a location that continues to live on through popular culture. Of course, no Victorian cemetery would be complete without its share of ghostly tales, and Highgate is no exception. People have long whispered about eerie happenings here, shadowy figures seen at dusk, inexplicable cold spots, and even the feeling of being watched. But perhaps the most famous supernatural and controversial story associated with Highgate Cemetery is that of the Highgate vampire.
In the 1970s, Highgate Cemetery was thrust into the spotlight after reports of a dark, mysterious figure with piercing red eyes seen wandering amongst the graves.
Media reports fanned the flames, and soon stories of a vampire haunting the cemetery spread like wildfire. The local newspapers fueled the frenzy, with groups of vampire hunters and thrill seekers descending on it in the dead of night. But it wasn't all harmless fun. Sadly, the vampire hysteria led to real damage. Several graves were desecrated, resting corpses staked, and reports of occult rituals taking place in the cemetery caused real concern. It is this that caused the damage inside the catacombs which I mentioned earlier. I can only imagine it is terribly frustrating for the friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust who now put their time and energy into restoring it selflessly for future generations. On the other hand, I can only imagine the fear such a media frenzy created that resulted in a group of people truly believing the only action they could take was to desecrate historical and sacred graves to stop a demonic entity. What's your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. Whatever your take, there's no denying that these stories only increased the speculation that something wasn't right, and Highgate became a hotspot for those dabbling in the dark arts, which further added to its haunted reputation. And while the vampire may have been just a myth, the eerie atmosphere of Highgate still makes it a favourite spot for those interested in the supernatural. Some paranormal experts will tell you that it's rare for a cemetery to be haunted. Most hauntings happen at the place of death, not in the eternal resting place. But there have been a few reports of ghostly apparitions in the area, and a quick Google search on what is the most haunted cemetery in England will almost always take you to Highgate. So, what actual apparitions have been said to live here apart from that vampire? It seems the most reported spectre is that of a tall man in a top hat. The shadowy figure has been spotted by several witnesses over the years, but not in the cemetery itself. Instead, he's been known to haunt the nearby Swains Lane, which separates the east and west side. Some believe he is a Victorian man looking for the grave of his lost love. Others claim he is the ghost of a young man who took his own life in the cemetery. I'm not sure. There are certainly a lot of reports about a similar looking figure, but I'm no paranormal expert. What do you think? Have you seen anything in Highgate yourself that sent shivers down your spine? Let us know in the comments.
So the question as to whether Highgate Cemetery is haunted, well, I will leave that for you to decide. But one thing is for sure, it has an amazing, remarkable atmosphere that I don't think you'll find in many other cemeteries. This place is a historian's paradise. Now, if you're inspired by today's video and you'd like to visit Highgate Cemetery for yourself, here's a few things that you should know.
First off, getting here is quite easy. The nearest tube station is Archway on the Northern Line, and from there it's just a 15 to 20 minute walk to the entrance. You'll find it's a lovely stroll, especially if you enjoy a bit of Victorian London charm along the way. I took the route through the beautiful Waterloo Park, which is where I stumbled across the George Michael Memorial Bench, which I mentioned earlier, and a few crows. The cemetery can be visited by ticket entry only, and this can be done online in advance to save time. I would really recommend ordering the guidebook if you are going, as this explains more about the history and the symbolism of the graves. Once again, if you have the time, then please do book a tour. Our tour guide was a wonderful man by the name of Gordon, and he was so knowledgeable, full of insider information, and he made an hour feel like 10 minutes. It was so interesting. The tours are run by the Friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust, which is a charity dedicated to preserving this historic site. All the money from the ticket sales and the donations goes directly back into maintaining the cemetery. So by visiting, you're not just enjoying a unique experience, you're helping to protect this important part of London's heritage for future generations. And with that, our time here comes to an end. Whether you came here for the history, the architecture, or the ghostly tales, I hope you've enjoyed our journey through one of the world's most famous cemeteries. It's a place where the past feels so present, where life and death seem to dance together under the canopy of trees and stone.
Okay, so that is it for this video this week. Thank you to everybody for watching. I hope this tour has been interesting for you, and I will see you on the next video. Happy Halloween! Bye!